As we dealt with the husband-wife relationship, today will be dedicated both at this hour and the worship hour and the two sessions tonight will be dedicated to the parent-child relationship. And these are, if you want a label for this, I call it Secrets and Skills in the Art of Being a Parent. And as I said Friday night, I got into this because I realized when my wife and I began to have our children, and for those of you who might be here for the first time, I have 4 children. You might wonder if somebody teaches this stuff really has kids. And I'm not through raising them yet. I've pretty well finished with 2 of them. My girls, my oldest girl got married last June to a wonderful young man, and my second daughter is a junior in college at our college. She's got a fellow on the line who's a real prince of a guy, and I'm real optimistic. And my oldest boy was called home this morning. He's a fine young man, I think, and my second son is 13. So I've had 3 teenagers, either 2 teenagers or 3 teenagers at the same time for the last few years. You know what a teenager is, don't you? It's God's plan for bankruptcy. It's now, and so I got into this because I realized that we need to learn the art of being parents just like we need to learn the art of being husbands and wives. There are certain secrets and skills. We start with the scriptures. I'm going to read for you Colossians 3:18 through 21. Wives, be subject to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Husbands, love your wives and do not be embittered against them. A great deal to say about that. But look at verses 20 and 21, sort of our theme verses for the day. Children, be obedient to your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. Fathers, do not exasperate your children that they may not lose heart. Children, be obedient to your parents in all things. We're going to talk about that this hour. We're going to talk about the very hard subject of discipline. I would point out just going in that this commandment that children are to obey their parents is a commandment from God, and it says, obey your parents that you may be well-pleasing to the Lord. You know, who's going to teach our children to live in such a way that they don't sin against God? Disobedient children are disobedient to God, not just to their parents. Disobedient children are not well-pleasing to God. And we talk about the basic fundamental biblical principles that we introduced earlier on. The principle of hierarchy. I taught us, I hope, that God has given us authority, the head of the house authority, that in order that we not that we would lord it over everyone, but that we would be able to fulfill our responsibility. Well, what is our responsibility in this regard? We think about the responsibility of the steward, the principle of stewardship. Our children belong to God first. They're His kids. We raise them for Him. Well, if we put these two together and look at this verse, it tells me very clearly that I am responsible to God to teach my kids to be obedient so that they will please Him. And who will do this teaching if I do not? Who is responsible for this? You see, that is, it's not an option. Children, disobedient children, what I'm trying to say, and not saying it very well, are not simply disobedient to their parents, they're disobedient to God. And one of the things we need to teach our children early on is that their responsibility to obey their parents is a responsibility that they have to God. Now, frankly, I don't mean to be unkind in this, but I'm going to say this, and I hope you'll forgive me if you take offense. But the thing of child raising today in our society, in our culture, is dominated by weak-mindedness, sentimentality. I tell you, I have seen otherwise intelligent people, strong people able to make a living, professional people make important decisions in the corporate world. People who get by very well, they don't dribble their oatmeal down their shirt. They pay their bills and qualify for a driver's license and live very fine lives until they have kids, and they turn into slobbering idiots. They get overwhelmed by sentimental nonsense. These little darlings, that show up in the house and look so cute. Aren't they precious? And people, and I see strong-minded people, intelligent people suddenly become weak-minded when confronted with a child. And it's I don't. Well, anyway, that's very true. Now, my basic principle in raising kids is this, and I'm repeating this, and this is my starting place. And here, this is my contribution to the science of child raising. It's this: raise your kids so you can like them. Raise your kids so you can like them. If you like them, chances are other adults will like them. Do you realize one of the greatest gifts you can give to your children is to raise them so other adults like them? If you want to make your life hard for your kid, a lot of parents, they love their kids so much that they cannot discipline them. But what they're doing is they're showing very little love. It is weak-minded because by raising what I call obnoxious little snots, and obnoxious little snots grow up to be obnoxious big snots. You ever notice that? Age does not improve snothood. Or snottiness, whatever. And life is hard for obnoxious snots. You raise a kid so that other adults don't like them, teachers don't like them, employers don't like them. You have made life miserable for your child. And what I tell the parents is, if you don't raise your kids to mind, I hope you have a lot of money to leave them. Either raise them to be self-disciplined, and the purpose of discipline, you see, is not punishment. The purpose of discipline is self-discipline. If you raise undisciplined children, you better leave them a lot of money, because they're going to have a hard time earning a living. They're going to have a hard time getting an education. We graduate less than half the students at Florida Christian College. Less than half the freshmen who come in September are there in June. You know why? Because they're not capable of college work? No. Because they didn't want to be there? No, they wanted to be there. Most of them, you understand? Most of them wanted to be there. They wanted to complete the program. They were capable of college work, but they had so little self-discipline that they could not make themselves do what had to be done to accomplish their real goals, and they simply don't. They can't get their reading done. They can't get their papers written, and they flunk out, and they hate themselves. They're disappointed. Often they come back after they grow up a couple of years and do make it. And the simple reason that nobody taught them discipline. The purpose of discipline, I teach, is self-discipline. You see, if we're going to make it in life, we have to do what has to be done when it has to be done, whether it's easy at the moment or not. And we can either learn that the easy way or learn it the hard way, or if you don't learn it at all, maybe you can inherit a lot of money. Now, and so the purpose of discipline is self-discipline. And we raise our kids so we can like them. Let me just give you a word of personal testimony. If other adults like your kids, you open up a whole new world to them. They can get jobs. My second boy, when he was 9 years old, twice. My oldest boy did it too, once. Some of our neighbors, they had a babysitting industry. Neighbors would have them. They would let them babysit. My second son, for instance, spent one weekend at a luxury hotel. Family took him with him. So when they went to their banquets, they could watch the kids. And he had a week in a luxury hotel. The next door was Burt Reynolds. And the next door down was Governor Graham of the state of Florida. And he spent the weekend with Burt Reynolds and Governor Graham and a lot of famous people at a luxury hotel. And his only job was when they went to the banquet at night that he had to watch the kids in the hotel room. He was 9 years old. And they trusted him. Understand that? You open worlds. You know one of my oldest son, my oldest son was in the hospital about a year ago, and he has asthma and some other problems. And a man gave him a valuable collector's item collector's item knife, limited edition knife as a keepsake, out of respect and friendship. And this man is one of our elders in our church, one of the greatest men I've ever met. He's one of the most decorated heroes of World War II. He has the French Medal of Honor. Well, you can take hours to talk about his medals. He was an ace in World War II and Korean War. He's flown. He was the first to fly many of the fighter planes that as they were developed. He was shot down in Korea, and he and some other men broke out of prison camp. And then he's a PhD, a graduate. He's a retired engineer, project engineer from General Motors. He's one of the most amazing men I've ever met. He's also the surrogate grandparent for my children. He's the resident grandparent for my children. And he's one of my son's best friends. Let me tell you, a man like that doesn't like just any kid. You know, I think one of the greatest honors for my sons are that this man's name is Paul Johnson. And one of the greatest honors, and I tell my boys this, you're greatly honored because he likes you. You got that? I'm trying to say, kids get by in school. They make their grades easier if the teachers like them. What do parents like about kids? Kids who are polite and obedient and intelligent, who can carry on a conversation and not act like a jerk. Kids who keep their word, who can be depended upon, who are trustworthy. Just basic straight life, you understand? Raise your kids so you can like them. If you don't like them, tell you what will happen. When you get older, you'll use babysitters too much. I'll sit here a while back. I took my wife out to dinner, and the next table there was a family. There was 4 adults and 1 child. I think it was a set of parents, a set of grandparents, and 1 4-year-old girl. And all 4 of those grandparents spent the whole evening trying to keep that girl in her chair. I almost volunteered to help. I thump her on the head once. I'd have done it. And let me tell you, the great tragedy was I'd bet my house the next time they went out, the kid was the babysitter. The kid stayed home. Now, there's times to get a babysitter, you know. We use babysitters some. But kids who are obnoxious get left home a lot. Kids who are obnoxious end up in daycare centers a lot. Kids who are obnoxious get sent away. Why? Because nobody likes an obnoxious little snot, even if it's yours. Raise your kids so you can like them. Other people will like them. You'll make life easier for them. Easier. You open doors to them. I'm very serious about that. Now, the purpose of discipline is self-discipline. That is, children who have enough self-discipline to do what they really want to do. The home is a benevolent dictatorship. As I say, I'm in charge. I'm responsible. Now, and the biblical concept of authority is the concept of absolute authority. So there are 2 kinds of authority. There is delegated authority and absolute authority, or intrinsic authority. I explain what I mean. You see, our government, the authority of our government is a delegated authority. That is, Mr. Reagan is in office because we elected him. We chose him as a nation, therefore he has authority. Now, God has authority, but we didn't elect him. Jesus is the head of the church. We didn't have a vote. You understand? God gave him. The Bible says that every knee should bow before him because God hath exalted him, and God has given him a name above every name. It's intrinsic authority. So, and as this boils down to child raising, you see a lot of children are raised with the modern idea, and they're taught this, a lot of modern psychology teaches it, the home should be a democracy, you know. Everybody should have a vote. And children are raised with the concept that they have no ultimate responsibility to obey any rule that, number 1, they didn't help make, or number 2, they don't agree with. You know, children should help make the rules because then they'll keep them. Oh? And one of the reasons why our schools are in chaos in America, public schools, is that the average first grade class, when those kids walk in, on the average school in America, over half those kids were raised on the concept of delegated authority. That is, they have been taught that they have no real responsibility to obey the teacher if they don't agree with the teacher or didn't help make the rule. You understand that? Delegated authority. We have this at the college. I recall we kicked a student out one time, and the student simply would not obey the rules. Nice kid, just could not keep the curfew and other rules. And I was on the committee that year, and we talked to the student. I said, "Did you understand the rules?" "Oh, yes." "Well, why don't you keep the rules?" "Well, but you must understand." She said, "You don't understand. I don't agree with those rules." And I was spokesman for the committee. I said, "Well, that's okay, but you must understand that doesn't matter whether you agree or not. It's our school. And our rules." But that student never understood that, and the student ended up leaving. Nice kid. But you understand? Being raised to believe, didn't obey any rule, didn't agree with. Nothing binding. And the experts say this, you know, you should never make a child obey anything they don't understand. My response to that is baloney. That's spelled B-A-L-O-N-E-Y. L-O-N-E-Y in the vernacular. If you're an academic like me, it's B-O-L-O-G-N-A. In either translation, it comes out the same. Listen, first of all, if you wait till your kids are old enough to understand the rules before they have to obey them, you're going to be 3 years behind starting in. You're going to spend your whole life playing catch-up ball, and you never catch up. See, the rule at our house is, why do I have to obey you, Father? Ready? Why do you have to do what Daddy says? The answer is, because I'm Daddy and you're not. And should we explain to our children our reasons? We most certainly should. We explain them when they're old enough to understand, if we choose to explain it. But we must teach our children. I teach my kids that they obey me because I am the Father. I'm their daddy. I'm Daddy and you're not. That's why you obey me. There is no connection between my explanation of my rules and their obedience to those rules. I explain them if I choose to, but if I don't want to explain, I don't. Why? Because they understand. Why do I have to do it? Well, because you have to. We call it the system. And we taught our kids on the way home from the hospital. Bring this little baby home from the hospital. Now, kid, I want you to understand how the system works. I'm Daddy and you're not. You understand that? No. Well, we don't start that early, but we get down to it right on. And listen to me. This is called the biblical principle of the hierarchy, and this makes perfect sense to children. Children understand this perfectly. What a child does not understand is their having authority. You see, I grew up, everybody in the community knew and I grew up in the farming community, and the fathers were in charge of the house. They had the absolute authority. My dad told me when I went to school, he said, that teacher, that's their turf. You do what the teacher says. That teacher is just like me. And we had a rule, and most of my friends had this rule. We either got no spankings or we got 2. If you got one in school, you got one you got home. Why? Because that teacher represents me. And I could explain to my father, that teacher misunderstood me. It wasn't fair. And my dad would have wept all the way to the woodhouse. He didn't care. He said, look, you do what the teacher says. I've seen an old maid school teacher, 60 years old, control 45 farm boys who were getting rambunctious by just suggesting, well, if you guys aren't going to cooperate, I'm just going to tell your fathers. There was order in that school for 4.5 months. Just one statement. You understand? Because she could run that class, had absolute authority, no problem, because she had the fathers behind her. And she knew it. All she had to do was just suggest that. My daddy with me and half the other class. My dad never asked my permission to be my father. He just figured he was Dad, and that's the way it was. And my dad taught me many valuable lessons. My dad got through raising me. I wasn't afraid of anybody. I wasn't afraid to work, and I knew how to do what I was told. He just sort of assumed that he was Daddy and I wasn't, and there were worse things to learn. Well, then in the 60s. The wives took over the homes. I don't mean to be in America. Most homes in America are run by the women now. Except that in the 70s, the kids took over. I've been in homes, and I'm not making this up, in the homes of Christian people that are run by 6-year-old kids. Whether the family does anything or not depends on how Junior feels about it. I have seen the same kid put to bed 8 times. That's a world's record. I'll go in the Guinness's book. When does a child go to bed? When he wants to. He eats what he wants to, does what he wants to. Parents run an absolute terror of their children. And the kids, small children, are running the homes of America. And let me tell you something. They don't want to. They don't like that arrangement. That does not make any sense to them. Because what they lose is the very important thing called security. And we get kids at the college who've been running their homes, and then they try to run the school. Then they run into Doc Smith and me and a couple other fellows, and we have a real brouhaha. And sometimes they get the message, and sometimes they don't. Now, discipline. Let me tell you why every child challenges the discipline of the authority of their parents. Okay? Tell you what's going on. And if you understand this, I think it will give us some real insights in the necessity of discipline. Now, by the way, the next hour I'm going to talk about the other side of this, the balance of strong discipline, absolute authority, is express love. So I'm just giving you the first half this hour. We'll get the second half the next hour. Why is it that every child challenges the authority of the parent? Now, every child does it, from one extreme to the other. There is the classic strong-willed child. You know what a strong-willed child is? God was perhaps preparing me to do this kind of thing because my first child, my daughter Leanne, was a strong-willed child. I mean, the textbook was written about her. Strong-willed. I mean, we'd say to her, don't touch that. This was a little child. Just out of diapers, or still in diapers. You ever have a kid that you spank her, and she'll look you in the eye and put you, You ever have a kid do this? Look you right in the eye. And you're going to touch it again. Pretty soon you couldn't put a piece of paper between her finger and what she was told not to touch. Then she'll go, and you spank her again, and she comes back. You ever have a kid do that? Yeah. I have spanked her 5 times in a row. You get to feeling like a child abuser after a while, some people give up, which is bad. I'll tell you why in a minute. I mean, just challenge you. Ever so often, just look you right in the eye and say, in effect, I'm not going to do it. Let's see if you can make me. On the other hand, you had the other opposite is the compliant child. My oldest son, my first boy, was a compliant child. Just exactly the opposite. Born that way. I'd say to Aaron, if I told him not to, I'd say, Aaron, don't touch that. I mean, he'd go in the next room, stay there for a week. I mean, if I offended you, he could write a book on how to repent. I mean, I'd just point at that little boy, and he'd melt. If I displease you, I just solved that issue for years. He just never touch anything. And I thought, man, there's nothing to raising boys. I got this thing down pat. All you got to do is point at him. And then came Adam. God's first and my last. And whereas I'd pointed at Aaron and Aaron would melt, I pointed at Adam and he froze. He'd give me the shoulder. You ever see a kid do this? Adam, don't touch that. Put that shoulder down. He'd give you a... See, what he was doing was cussing me. He just hadn't learned the words yet. And listen, my little Adam, he wasn't as strong-willed as my oldest daughter. But it took us about 3 months for Adam, and Adam was still in diapers. You got to start early. He was still in diapers. It took us 3 months to figure out who the head of the house was and who wasn't. And once he got that settled, he was fine. Adam's a fine fellow. He's still strong. He was always strong-minded. He has a hard time obeying, not because he's rebellious, but because he couldn't find the off button. Every kid, he's doing something, you tell him to stop it, and he means to stop it. He just can't. He's got momentum. You can't turn the corner. Strong-willed. And so I've had a strong-willed child. And by the way, a lot of strong-willed children end up in prison. And I had a compliant child and 2 somewhere in between. And you can't raise all kids the same. You can't do it. Let me tell you about strong-willed children. If you've got a strong-willed child, let me encourage you and discourage you. As I said, a lot of strong-willed children end up in prison. A strong-willed child is like a high-powered rifle. It just depends on which way you aim it. And what you have to do with the strong-willed child, what we have to do with every child, is to break their will without breaking their spirit. I'll teach you how to do that. One of my wife's sisters has a strong-willed child, a boy. His kid's okay, except his father was a wimp, and his mother didn't have a great deal of sense, frankly. And they always kept changing the subject. They'd read the books on how to raise kids. You see, Spock said, if you get a child who's got something not supposed to have, you trade him. You get a toy and say, here, you give me that, and I'll give you this. Or if they throw a tantrum, you put them in a room and by themselves, close the door and say, well, you work that out on your own, which is wrong. It's not what you do. You see, they're trying to get something settled, and you keep changing the subject on them. Well, his parents kept changing the subject, and the kid never had any. He just ran wild, and if he'd been caught, he would have ended up in prison if he'd have been caught. I'm serious. He'd end up in prison if he hadn't been caught. If he'd have been caught. When he was 15 years old, he was beating up on his mother. And he asked his parents to put him in an institution so he could learn to control himself. You understand? He asked his parents to do that. He was basically a nice kid. When he wasn't stupid, he knew what was going on. And all of his life, he was begging for somebody to head him off. Finally, he just came out and asked them, and they did. They put him in an institution, and he was there for about a year, and he learned more self-control. But he had to do it himself. My daughter's a strong-willed child. It's almost weird. I mean, a strong-willed child sets their mind to do something. You might as well just get out of the way. She's going to do it, whether it's bad or good. And she was the super achiever of the family. I mean, you name it, she was the achiever. National Honor Society, Girls State, Girls Nation. She met President Carter. She was cheerleader, ensemble. She ended up running everything she gets into. She ends up running it. She was a Orange County second runner-up in the Orange County Miss America pageant. She was Orange County Junior Miss, but all over the country. First quarter at the college, she made the best grades in the freshman class because she was determined to do it and didn't make it since. For the rest of the 4 years, she never made the best grades in the class. She didn't want to make the best grades. She just wanted to prove she could do it. You know, she's going to do it. Once she did it, she's on to something else. Strange mentality. And she got married thank God, she married a Marine Corps officer. It's exactly what she needed. He flies jet planes, lands them on carriers. That's what it takes to get in control of her. And she's crazy about him. He's a great fella, great Christian. And but she's at it again. She's been married a year. She's took a youth group of 2 kids, and now it's a youth group of 15 kids. She's working with the Bible college, helping with their summer teams. She's made a movie, got a modeling contract, and sings professionally, and teaches school. I mean, it's amazing just to watch them. We just sit back and, just don't trying to get stepped on. You see what I'm saying? Kids end up in prison, or they become great achievers if they're these strong-willed children. Depends on how you aim them. So we ought not to be afraid of strong-willed children, but they take a lot of raising. You understand? Leandra took a lot of raising. Well, but whether a child is a strong-willed child or a compliant child, I'm going to tell you why they test. I'm going to give you by analogy, teach you why every child tests the authority of the parent and what's going on. And let me teach you a theory this way. Suppose you found yourself in some kind of science fiction world. You find yourself suddenly plopped down on a strange planet. You didn't know where you were. But you knew one thing, you were the smallest, weakest thing on that planet. And all around you was a forest or a jungle, and it was full of, there were sounds coming out of it. You don't know what the sounds were. You see moving objects, you don't know what they are. They're all bigger than you are. You don't know if they hurt you or if they're dangerous to you or not, but because you don't know, you're afraid. See, that's what a child is. A child is plopped down in the world, and they're the smallest, weakest thing in it. And they see things and they hear things, and they don't know whether to be afraid or not, and what they need is security. Fortunately, in my analogy in this world, you're in the middle of a clearing and there's this jungle, but there's a fence around you. Boy, you're glad. Because that fence keeps whatever is out there out there. The fence is your security. What would you do ever so often? Well, my question is vague, so I'll answer it myself. What you do is every so often, depending on how scared you were, you'd check the fence. Why? Because that fence is what is your security. And when a child challenges your authority, that's what he's doing. He's checking the fence. And the issue is this. Are you tough enough to protect me? Are you tough enough for me to trust? That is the issue in authority. And when a child challenges the authority of the parent, that's what's going on. Are you tough enough for me to trust? Suppose you did walk up to the fence one day and you pushed on the thing, just fell over. Here you are, the weakest, smallest thing in this world, and this fence, which is supposed to protect you, you can push it over. If you can push it over, whatever is out there can push it over. And you see, the fence doesn't have to fall down every time you push, it just has to fall down once. And that's why Children who check the authority are children who challenge the authority. The child says, in effect, I'm not going to do what you tell me, let's see you make me. They're saying, I'm scared, I want to know if you're tough enough for me to trust. And if the fence keeps falling down, they'll keep pushing and pushing and pushing, hoping for it sometime to stand. And if it keeps falling down, they lose their security. And it's very bad. Does that make sense to you? Now that's what's going on. And so we owe it to our kids. One of the things about my wife, she is one of the toughest people I've ever met. You talk about motherhood is often pictured as being frilly and pink and lacy. You see his Mother's Day cards. Listen, if they made Mother's Day cards that represented motherhood, they'd be made out of leather with iron studs. I mean, if you want to get tromped on, you get between a real mother and some mothering she's got to do, and I promise you, you'll get walked on. Motherhood has to be the toughest thing in the world. My wife's tough. Her policy was, look, those are my knickknacks. I got here first, you leave them alone. I'm the mother, you do what I say. And one of the reasons LeAngela turned out so well, I think, is that she lost every battle with her mother. Now, see, this is why we must not permit uncontrolled behavior. What is uncontrolled behavior? Tantrums are uncontrolled behavior. Kids throw tantrums. We had a rule at our house, every kid gets one tantrum per life. And then I throw a big one. Only one can throw a tantrum in our house is me, and I know how. And no, we do not allow pouting. Pouting is uncontrolled behavior. When a kid is pouting, he's cussing you. He just doesn't know the words yet. When he learns them, he'll use them. Pouting, mad, you know what mad crying is? When a kid who's crying not because he's hurt, it's because he's mad. He's letting you have it. They work at it. You can always tell a mad cry from a kid. They're working at it. They work it up. And you can stop it. You know, all kinds of ways. But listen, children are challenging you to battles that they want to lose. And they're glad when they lose because everything's okay. The fence stands. No uncontrolled behavior. You know, some kids do what they're told the fifth time they're told. You ever notice that? They learn that's the time that counts. Why? With that tone of voice, and mother's a certain shade of red, and then, this is, I better obey now. Why? This is the one that counts. Let me tell you, a child who can learn to do what they're told the fifth time can learn to do it the first time. If that's what counts, they learn. You see, kids are, whatever we permit, we teach. Kids are what we've taught them to be. And let me tell you, children who are disciplined, not just punished, but disciplined, they have lives that are filled with order, and they're glad about it. Listen, children who are raised to do what they're told, to be disciplined, cannot stand to be around kids who are not raised to be disciplined. They cannot stand to be around them. And kids pick up on this. Do you know that my older son, he did the babysitting for a family when he was doing that more. And do you know this family had 2 little boys? And do you know that those little boys would obey my son better than they would obey their own parents? In fact, they used to have my son babysit for them simply because the kids were getting out of control. My wife has babysat for a nephew who would obey her better than he would obey his own mother. Kids, listen, kids instantly know. They pick it up on it. They know what the rules are. They're smart. Kids are very smart. And kids, and listen to me, kids will naturally gravitate towards someone who will lovingly discipline them. Do you know that? If you give kids a choice, if they have a choice, little kids, they will choose the adult, whether it's a parent or not, they will choose the adult who loves them enough and takes them seriously enough to discipline them. They'll prefer to be with them. Which teachers did you like best in school? The teachers who let you get away with anything, or the teachers who required you to measure up and accomplish things? Which teacher did you like the best? I'll tell you, the teacher, we have to, every high school has teachers who want to be popular, who want to be one of the kids. The kids get away with murder, and they hold those teachers in contempt. But the favorite teachers are the teachers who say, look, you measure up and you do what's expected of you and you get the job done. And that's who the kids love. And so if you're not going to discipline your kids, be prepared to lose them. If you don't discipline your kids, they will hold you in contempt. And they will seek out other adults who will put some order in their lives. I'm very serious about that. I don't mean to be unkind. Children pick up on this. And we must be consistent. Well, our time is about up. Is there any questions on this? Do you understand the principle of what's going on in discipline? Children are looking for order and security. Now, I'm going to make one statement which is going to be the bridge into what I'm going to say next hour. And it's this, that one of the primary functions of good discipline, strong discipline, is that discipline makes room for love. The choice is not between love and discipline, because, hear me, without discipline, you have no love. And I'll tell you why next hour. Is our time up? Yes. Very often. I could take my kids to almost anywhere and have absolute control over them, and I give them a lot of freedom, because all I had to do was whistle if I needed them, and they would come. And a woman jumped on me one time and said I was treating my kids like dogs. Her kids acted like dogs. Mine didn't. I need control. When Adam was little, you know, when the rest of the kids, when we went to go places, we were on a trip out west, and we bought them these little harnesses. In the morning, we'd get him up and put on, and I bought about a 50-foot clothesline rope. This cotton clothesline rope that put the hook on the end, and we'd stop at Grand Canyon or somewhere, and I'd just hook up Adam and let him run. Just reel him out, you know. And figure if he went over the side, I could just haul him back up. And the little fella had a great deal of freedom. And a woman accused me then of treating my kid like a dog. I didn't pay attention. You see, it was better than hanging on to him and beating him on the head and hollering at him every 5 minutes. And I tell you that because there's a metaphor there. There's a parable there. See, kids who are under control have more freedom than those who do not. More real freedom. They're free. They're free to be trusted. They're free to adventure. They're free to do things and be things if they are under authority. Many people think it's the opposite, but they're wrong. And so, and the last thing I said, and this is what the point I'm making, is that one of the purposes, one of the benefits of strong discipline, by that I mean children being under control, in public and in private, is that discipline makes room for love. It is not well-disciplined children who are abused. It is poorly disciplined children who are abused. I cannot remember the last time I spanked a child. It's been so long. I think if you discipline children properly, by the time they get to be school age, you're just about done spanking. So you don't have to do it very often if you do it right, and they know you will. Self-control. We had an apple tree, a great gift to child raising, out back of our house where we lived for so many years. And my wife would say to me, Roger, the kids are getting out of control. You know, kids kind of get on the ragged edge. It's not really bad, but it's not open rebellion. They're just starting to get that look in their eye, you know. And she'd say, well, and I said, well, and I'd go out and many a time I'd go out and cut a limb off the apple tree and make a big thing of it. Make sure the kids are watching, you know. And I strip off the leaves and, you know, test it against in the air to see if it's going to sound right, and put it on top of the refrigerator and let it hang over so that they can see it. And say, well, I'm probably going to need this one of these days right soon, so I better have it handy. And I'll tell you, I can't tell you how many apple switches laid up there and rotted because I didn't need them, because the kids knew I would. If you promise a kid a spanking, you ought to always keep your word. He kind of hopes you do. Now, and discipline makes room for love. And I want to talk about two things in the time that we have this morning. I want to talk about prophetic grace. I promised to do this earlier. Prophetic grace and express love. Raise our kids so we can like them. Do you like your kids? I'll tell you, I like my kids. I could kill them sometimes, but I like them. You know what I mean? I mean, but we have our moments. I do not buy the idea that quiet kids are necessarily good kids. Some good kids are quiet. Some good kids are just some quiet kids are just sneaky. Our kids, we are loud at our house, but that's the way we are. Remember I said last night, every family has a different chemistry? Some of the finest kids I've ever known have been very quiet kids because they were raised by quiet parents in a quiet home, and that's great. Some of the noisiest kids I've met are very good kids. And we're noisy at our house. We had a lot of hollering, and as I say, I love them. We have our moments like everybody else does. We do not have a perfect household. I've tried to make it clear Friday night I'm not offering our family as a perfect family because it isn't, and you already could guess that. But we want to raise our kids to be turned on to life. I think one of the worst things that can happen to a kid today is to be raised emotionally sterile. Some kids are quiet, not because they're good, there's just nothing to them. They're emotionally sterile. That is, and listen, there are kids who are, by the time they get in the 5th and 6th grades, are turned off to life. And you get a kid turned off to life, it's very hard to turn them back on. What do I mean by emotionally sterile? I mean kids that can't laugh and can't cry. They just go through life with a smirk. And I want my kids and my boys, I want them to cry when it's time to cry. And I want them to laugh when it's time to laugh. And I want them to be excited when it's time to be excited, and to be quiet when it's time to be quiet. One of my happiest memories are tears. I like it when my oldest daughter comes back for the first time, been married, moved out of the house, and she drives up at Christmas time, hadn't been home in about 6 months, and her 16-year-old brother walks out and starts snotting and blowing around all over the front yard because Leangela's home. I like it to see my boy cry when it's time to cry. When his uncle, one of his favorite uncles, great uncles, who's a missionary in Japan, when he leaves the house, and my oldest boy knows he's not going to see him again for 4 years, he cries. I like that. It's time to cry. You understand? It's just time. And there's time to laugh. I believe in laughter, and though life is hard enough, we need joy in the home. As I said the other night, I appoint every father on behalf of God chairman of the Joy Committee. There is to be joy in my house. There's joy in the house of God, and I'm responsible for putting it there, not taking it out. And sometimes there's, and I tell you, it's fun to be. Frankly, when I grew up in a house, sometimes it wasn't a lot of fun. Maybe you grew up in a house that was not much fun. Let me tell you, if there's no joy in your house, your kids will find someplace else to go. It's one of the reasons, by the way, not the only reason, one of the reasons why a lot of kids can't wait to get to be 16 and get a driver's license. Because then they can get out and they can go home to eat and sleep, kind of like a hotel. It needs to be joy. And it doesn't take much. You just got to develop a sense of humor and laugh when it's time. In our house, we have a rule at our house that when you take a shower, you always lock the door. Why? You'll always get a glass of cold water over the top of the shower curtain just to help you get your day started, And I take my showers in absolute terror. But I taught them that. I'm chairman of the bottom pinching committee in my house. My job is ever going to all my kids and pinch their bottom every morning to get them going for the day. And now they object. And I say to them, no, I'm sorry, it's a rotten job. Somebody's got to do it. And you back a boy into the closet, and he says, leave me alone. I say, no, I'm sorry, but I have my responsibilities, and God made me the head of the house, and your bottom needs to be pinched. I'm the one to do it. But I also lock the door when I'm shaving. You ever had your bottom pinched when you were shaving? A big gash right here. They're learning. They're learning the art, and that may not sound very spiritual to you, but let me ask you this, and I don't want to see a show of hands, especially the men here, especially the older men. I wonder how many of you older men could tease your father? How many of you could tease your father? Do you know that men do not tease somebody they do not like? If a man teases you, he likes you. See, the way men operate, if a man doesn't like another man, he'll treat him very politely. He'll treat him with great respect. Men only tease men they like. Is that true, man? That's the way we operate. Ask you this, do your children like you enough to tease you? You see, my rule was, as I've stated 2 or 3 times, raise your kids so you can like them. You see, if you don't like them, other people won't like them. But listen to me, if you like them, they'll like you. Do you know it is psychologically impossible not to like somebody who likes you? You try it. If somebody likes you, they can be the dirtiest old cruddy bum in the world, and you'll like them anyway. Why? Well, if they're smart enough to like you, they've got to have something going for them. Especially men. Men are naturally arrogant. I figure the guy can be public enemy number 1 if he likes me. There's a heart of gold there somewhere. You know, he's wise. That's just the way we operate. I was telling Brother Dick this morning, when I went to Hamilton, Ohio, my first year in the ministry, I baptized 7 men whose wives had been Christians for years. And you know why? In almost every case, it was because they thought preachers didn't like them. And I liked those fellas and told them so. Told their wives, and they told them. See, I grew up with non-Christians. I grew up kind of rough. And I like non-Christians. I do. I got about as many non-Christians friends as I have Christian friends. I hope to win them. But I like non-Christians. You don't have to be a Christian for me to like you. And when they found out, and they wouldn't listen to they hated preachers until they found out I liked them. Then they liked me. And then they had to listen and want them to the Lord. They didn't have any choice. Why? They just had to like me because they found out I liked them. And told them. Do you get the point? But listen, the time is going to come when you're going to want your kids to like you, because if somebody doesn't like you, you don't like them, and you will not listen to what they say. I picked up on this little bit of wisdom when I was counseling teenagers when I was in the local ministry, and if you had a kid who was upset, you could bet your house on this. It was utterly predictable. I would ask this question: do your parents love you? And they would say, oh yes, my parents love me. But see, that's kind of built in. Well, why? That's how it operates. Parents love kids. I'm the kid, they're the parent, therefore they love me. Then I would ask the next question: do your parents like you? Oh no. Oh no. They don't like my music, they don't like my hair, they don't like my clothes, they don't like my friends, they don't laugh at my jokes. They're on me all the time. I can't please them. They don't like me. And those kids never saw the contradiction there. My parents love me, but they don't like me. Raise your kids so you can like them, and then like them, and tell them so. This is science. You can try this. I've done it a number of times as an experiment. I teach the history and logic of science, and this is, among other things, this is science. You can watch a physical, visible change come over a kid if you tell him you like him. You take a kid who's kind of down, having a bad day, and you can say, hey, Adam, I want to tell you something. Been looking at you lately. I want you to know I like what I see. You're my kind of people. You're the kind of fellow I'd take fishing. You're okay. A physical change will come over that child. A physical change. Leanne's always would get up and run out of the room, just pure delight, just whew, Leslie would skip. Aaron would mumble, and they all act in predictable ways. So you understand that? And you see, I want to like my kids. I want them to know I like them because I want them to like me, because time is going to come when I need them to listen to me. And one of the reasons why a lot of teenagers don't listen to their parents is because they are convinced their parents don't like them. Whether it's true or not, they're convinced. And it is psychologically impossible to really pay serious attention to somebody who doesn't like you. We just can't do it. We'll disagree even if we would have agreed with them otherwise. If we know they're right, we'll disagree if they don't like us. Do you understand that? Raise your kids so you can like them, and tell them so. And you may think, again, this sounds arrogant. I don't mean to sound boastful, but I just honestly say, quite honestly, that I like my kids. I always have liked teenagers. I think teenagers get a bum rap. And I've liked all the kids my teenagers have brought around, with a couple of exceptions. But some of the greatest kids that people I've ever met have been other teenagers my kids have brought around. I like teenagers. They're some of my favorite people. I'm not afraid of teenagers. And I work with high-quality men. I know high-quality men. I'd rather take my own sons fishing than any men I know. There's a lot of people that you respect, but you wouldn't take them fishing. And And so, listen, and so when we sit down to talk about things, my kids will listen to me because they know I like them. I could kill them sometimes. We have our moments, but I like them. You like your kids? Your kids like you? It's very important. And we create this kind of child by, one of the main tools is prophetic grace. What's our biblical principle? One of our foundational doctrines is grace. And prophetic grace, let me redefine it for you as I did the other night. Prophetic grace is giving a child credit for being something ahead of time. Sometimes 10 years ahead of time. Sometimes 20 years ahead of time. My wife taught me this. My wife's a very wise woman, or wise person. And I can hear her, still see her. One of my favorite memories of taking a little child, who's still in diapers, a little girl, saying, "Leangela, Leslie, I want you to know," and this kid can't even understand English yet. "I want you to know you're a very special child. You're not ordinary, and whatever you're going to be, it's going to be something wonderful." And tell that child that day in and day out, year after year. Well, one of the themes that we have in our house is, you are special. Now, I'm going to say something here which, at the risk of being misunderstood, and you may not like me saying this, and it may turn you off, and that's okay. At least think about it. And if it does turn you off, I'm sorry about that. I don't mean it to be that way. But I very frankly say that my wife and I have never been interested in raising ordinary children. For two reasons. First of all, have you looked at ordinary lately? Have you looked at the average? I'll tell you, a retarded chimpanzee can be average anymore. It takes nothing to be average. The average is so low that average is nothing. The second thing is, the Bible teaches that Christians are to be a peculiar people. We're to be different. Amen. And so we have taught our kids from the beginning, you are not like other kids. You are special. You are not ordinary. You are quality. For two reasons. First of all, you're a Christian. And secondly, you're a Chambers. And that's how we operate. And that's the part which I risk of being misunderstood. We tell our kids over and over, we told them before they could talk, look, in our house, I get very angry about that. I say, look, I'm not in the jerk raising business. I do not raise jerks. If you want to be a jerk, you go live with somebody else. We're all thoroughbreds here. We're all quality. We walk worthy of our calling. You see, you ever notice you talk to a teenager? You ever preach to a teenager, one of your little sermons? You ever notice on the third word you're talking to yourself? You want to talk to yourself, you just preach morals to a teenager. They don't listen. I'll tell you why they don't listen. For one thing, they already know. Teenagers are smart. They know. They know exactly what's going on. Second thing is, they do not want to hear what's right. There's something about the hormones. I don't know why. There's something about the hormones that cause the body to develop, also cause the ears to shut down when it comes to sermons. Teenagers just do not want to hear right versus wrong. I'm serious. Good teenager, any teenager, it's built in. It's part of the blood. I don't know why it is. It's weird, but it's true. Let me tell you what teenagers will listen to. You start talking about what's evil versus what's good, they don't listen. They already know. They don't want to hear it. You start talking about what's quality versus what is cheap, and they'll tune you in. The kids want to know two things. They want to know what's smart, and they want to know what's quality. And we say we don't do certain things. Why? Because it's sin? No, we taught that. You see, as for right and wrong, my wife taught me this. She said that what we must do to our children is build in a conscience. So right from the very beginning, we say to our kids, we are Christians. Christians do this. Christians don't do that. Don't tell them why. Tell them why later. We're Christians. We don't do this. One of the favorite things. We're Christians. We don't do this. My wife's rule is, when you get older, you may do it, but I'm going to see you don't enjoy it. A conscience. You construct a conscience, and then you build on that foundation of a conscience, a strong conscience, and then you talk about what's right or wrong. Say, look, we don't do that. Why? That's stupid. We don't drink liquor at our house. We don't drink beer. Why? Because we don't think it's very smart to dissolve your brain. We just don't operate that way. We don't have pornography in our house, and we don't let our kids go to R-rated movies. Why? For the same reason we don't eat garbage. We don't think it's real intelligent to put garbage in your stomach or in your head. You see? You tell a kid, you start moralizing, you say, look, kid, that's really stupid, isn't it? You want to be stupid? Go eat garbage. Or read garbage. Be stupid. No, at our house, we're not stupid. We don't do that kind of thing. And at our house, we're not cheap. Say to a kid, look, you need to understand that I love you too much to let you grow up to be a jerk. I had my older son tell me that recently. Dad, I'm glad you didn't let me grow up to be a jerk. Said that. And you can really get on a kid and turn him on. You know, you can climb on a kid and turn him off, or you can get on his case and turn him on, depending on how you put it. You can tell him he's a dirty, rotten slob, and you never listen to me, and why do I put up with you, and why do you have to be so bad, and just turn him completely off. Or you can John say, look, you're a great kid, and I love you too much, but this is unacceptable. I'm not in the jerk business. I love you too much to let you be a jerk, and then you just whip the daylights out of him, and he'll love it. Later on. And what do you say to a kid? I'll tell you how to talk to kids, teenagers. As I said the other night, when it came to the big talk to tell our kids about sex, and I may say more about this later tonight as time permits, but it was my job to talk to the boys. And I'll tell you what, something I told both of my boys, and this is in an attempt to be practical. Understand? This is practical. I said, I was telling them about puberty, and I said, and what the changes are going to take place in their body. And I said, one of the things that's going to happen is you're going to start growing a beard. And you'll start shaving once a year first, and then then you'll be down to once a month and once a week. And I said, Aaron and Adam, both. I said, time's going to come and you're going to shave every day. You know what that means? No, Dad, what does that mean? It means this: that at least once a day for the rest of your life, you're going to have to shave a quality person, or you're going to shave a jerk, depending on how you conduct yourself while you're a teenager. See, teenage is not time out. A lot of people think it is. It's not time out, it's time in. It counts. And if you want to spend the rest of your life shaving a jerk, then you just be a jerk. But if the rest of your life you want to shave a quality person, then you watch how you live. It's up to you. What are you guys shaving? And so we teach I believe this. I recommend it's called prophetic grace. You tell them what they're going to be. That is not a profession, but how that you're going to be a quality person, and then you give them credit ahead of time. And do you know if if you notice this, if somebody thinks well of you, you'll bust a gut to prove them right. That's right. And if somebody thinks you're rotten, you'll bust a gut to prove that right too. I know kids who ruin their own lives just proving that their daddy's right, because he's told them what a bum they are, and they're going to show him that he's right. They'll do it. It works either way. And so and a lot of the fringe benefits. You see, it protects kids from unwanted peer pressure. I didn't realize this when we did it. This was a fringe benefit. Learned this by accident. It saves kids from peer pressure, because children grow up with the understanding that the ordinary rules don't apply to them. Why? Because they're not ordinary people. So ordinary people take drugs. Ordinary people do things. Or ordinary people go to the drive-in and don't put the speaker in the car. That's what anybody can do that. But those rules don't apply to me. This really came home to me. My second daughter, Leslie, she was in junior high school. She was one of the editors of the school paper, and she had written this article, a parody on cigarette smoking and drinking and drugs. And I'm a can of beer. This is what I'll do for you. She was a parody, and some of the kids were shouting. And she's telling it, and some of the kids at school, and junior high school is cruel, and they were calling her names in the hall and shouting at her, and saying obscene things. And she always sat at the other end of the table. And we're having spaghetti that night. Never forget it. And we're eating spaghetti, and she's telling me all these things these kids are calling her. And she's just happy as a clam. Just she's rolling spaghetti and telling me this, and my face is turning red. This is my darling daughter, and I put my fork down, and pretty soon I'm mad and she's eating. Finally I said, well, Leslie, doesn't it bother you what these kids are saying about you? So help me. She looked at me like I was stupid, which I was. And she said, what, bothered? She said, Why should I care what those jerks think? And it occurred to me, it really didn't bother her, because she figured to her mind, they were in another world. It did not matter what they thought of her. And I went back to eating spaghetti, much humbled because she was right and I was wrong, because it didn't make any difference. Does that make sense to you? And listen to me, kids will set high goals for themselves if the parents set high goals for them. I want my kids to be special kids. I want them to be eagles, not sparrows. And I say this to my kids, you mean eagle? Be an eagle, or you can be a sparrow. Eagle flies high above the clouds and sees the world. And sparrows flit around and say nothing but cheap, cheap, cheap. And you want to be cheap, you go live somewhere else. Does that sound arrogant to you? It'll turn kids on, I promise you, because kids want to be the real thing. Kids don't want to be cheap. Kids don't want to be jerks. They want to be quality, and they want to be God's kind of quality. And if we give them half a chance, they'll be it. Prophetic grace. Say to a kid, look, I don't know what you're going to be, but it's going to be whatever it is, going to be worth something. Adam, I've been looking at you lately. I want you to know that your old man's an expert in people. I know all about people, and I like what I see in you. And whatever you're going to be for God, it's going to be really great. You're going to fly high and do much. It's going to be important that you were alive. I can just see that. I see that in you, Aaron. You're going to do something with your life that's going to count for something. And they begin to think of themselves that way. I'm special. Much is required of me. Well, you may not agree with that, but at least think about it. Prophetic grace, it works. So often, the opposite of this is to say to our kids, in effect, look, you measure up and I'll accept you. You meet my standards, and when you do, I'll give you credit, but not until. And they'll never make it. You see, this gives a context for discipline. Do you see that? A context for discipline. You can look at a kid in the eye and say, look, I'm going to wail the daylights out of you. Why? Because I just love you too much to let you do a jerky thing like that. If you were a jerk, it wouldn't make any difference. I've never spanked a kid yet because he was bad. I only spank good kids. Spank a kid because you say to a kid, look, why do you be so bad? If you tell a kid he's bad and he does bad things, why spank him? He's just making his calling an election, sure. But if you tell a kid he's good, say, look, you're good. If you were bad, it would make any difference. Since you're good, I can't permit that, and I have to spank you because you're good. It really works. I mean, I believe in giving the big picture. Adam, my youngest, is my philosopher. And remember one time I had to spank him, and he was standing there. He was about 6, 7, and he was standing there trying to think. He always tries to get things in order, see how that fits into a worldview. And so I said to Adam, Adam, you know why I spanked you? And he wasn't too sure. I said, let me ask you a question, Adam. Did you ever see me spank the kids up the street? He thought, no, Daddy. I'd like to, but I never did. I said, well, now, Adam, you tell me why I spank you sometimes and don't spank them. He wasn't too sure. And I said, I'm going to tell you, Adam, it's because your last name's Chambers, and you belong to me, and there isn't anything in this world more important to me than what you become. And I just love you too much to let you do that which is not worthy of you. You ever spank a kid and build his self-image at the same time? All depends on what you say. Depends on how you put it. Depends on the reasons. Prophetic grace. The last thing I want to talk about in the time. Do you have any questions? You can ask questions if you want to. Again, you think about it anyway, even if you don't agree. The last thing I want to talk about is expressed love. Expressed love. By expressed love, I mean just that. The opposite of expressed love is assumed love. And if there ever was a day when assumed love would get the job done, that day is over. For I don't believe it was ever here. The text that we read this morning at the Bible Scholar, let me repeat it, some of the words. It says, "Fathers, do not exasperate your children, that they may not lose heart." Children today are losing heart. Children today are a discouraged outfit. I don't mean older children, I mean younger children. Fathers, we are not to discourage our children, that they may not lose heart. How do you keep from discouraging children? I teach, and I may be wrong about it, but I think I'm right. I teach that the basic rule for raising children of great hearts, not destroyed hearts, is the proper balance of biblical discipline and expressed love. Love makes room for discipline. Discipline makes room for love. If you discipline a child without expressed love, a child will turn mean and bitter and lose his attitude. If you just love a child without discipline, then you turn out a spoiled brat. But you see, love makes room for discipline. If you discipline a child, but that child knows that you not only love them, but you like them, they'll accept discipline. You understand? A child will accept discipline from a parent who likes them and then really loves them. But if the only time that parent gives that child its full attention is when they've done something wrong, a child will not accept discipline, and they'll turn mean. On the other hand, if we discipline our children, we got room for love. Express love. If you can just, fellas, if you have any young fathers here, you can take your family out to eat the nicest restaurant in town. And if you can just clear your throat and get control of your kids, that leaves a lot of time for jokes and stories and how you doing and I love you. A lot of parents can't express love to their children because they just try to keep the house together. They spend all their time just running them down, trying to keep the house from being torn apart, trying to keep some semblance of order. They don't have time to love their children. Discipline makes room for love. Does that make sense? If children who are not disciplined, you always have to be on them. You always have to be swatting at them and screaming at them, which is psychological abuse. You always have to be snarling at them just to keep life in order. But if you have strong discipline, then you're free to enjoy them and love them. Discipline makes room for love. Express love. Well, let me ask a question, and this is a rhetorical question. I do not want to see a show of hands, but I can tell you what the answer is. If I did ask for a show of hands, all the men in here, especially the older men, I would get very few hands. If I would ask this: how many of you men, especially you older men, can remember your father ever looking you right in the eye and saying, "I love you"? And how many of you can remember your father ever hugging you? If you've never been raised that way, one of the hardest things to learn to do is to express love. You see, the old method in our country was assumed love. I love my kids. It's assumed. Why? I support them, take responsibility for them. They must assume that I love them. But that won't work anymore if it ever did work. And if you were raised on assumed love, and you have to learn and if you're a man, this is harder for men. If you were raised on assumed love, you understand? Where love was just assumed. One of the hardest things you'll ever do is to learn expressed love. To look your children right in the eye and say, "I love you," and to learn the fine art of hugging. I recommend hugging. Now, lots of hugging and lots of expressed love. We need to hug our kids every day. This sounds like a try, but I really mean it. And tell them we love them. And make it a hilarious thing. I mean, look right in the eye. To take this 13-year-old boy by the shoulders and say, before he goes to school, and look him right in the eye and say, "Adam," shake him good and get him upset. "Adam, you know, don't you, that I really love you? That if any boy ever had a daddy that loves him, you got a daddy that loves you. You know that, don't you?" Make him answer. "Yes, Daddy, I know that. I really love you. I like you. But you'll never forget that. It's important that you know I love you." A kid who goes to junior high school needs that. And they need to be hugged. Little girls, by the way, have a deep need to spend a lot of time on Daddy's lap. I don't know why, but all the experts agree that it's true, and I think they're right. It's one of the reasons why Daddy must be there. This quantity versus quality time that I talked about last night doesn't work. Little girls need to log several thousand hours on Daddy's lap, and if they don't get it, something is missing the rest of their life. And little girls know this. Little girls, you understand that? They need it to sit on Daddy's lap. I don't know why. They really need it. For the hour. And so if you've got a book to read, get a kid on your lap. My little girl. And I need other things. My second daughter grew up as a horse. She spent half her time winning and neighing. She loved horses. And I'm probably one of the few preachers you know that I have several thousand miles on my hands and knees. I mean, as a horse. I'm one of the better horses that you ever met. It's, Daddy, be my horse. Okay, you know. And I wouldn't mind, except she always invited whoever's around to ride with her. And I've for a long time I had calluses on my knees. Well, a preacher ought to have calluses on his knees anyway. And I think we need to be on our knees before God, but as a horse. You know, and little boys like to wrestle with their dad. You know, a little boy will pick on you. A little boy, he'll pick on you to see if you take him seriously enough to run him down and tickle him. To sort of build in the little boys. They need to be run down. They need to be hugged. Now when they get to a certain age, they don't want to be hugged anymore. Comes with the hormones. And but at least they think what comes with the hormones, they think they don't want to be hugged anymore. You get to be in high school, be teenagers. And so that's one of the reasons I've always kept in shape and jogged and lifted weights. That's how I hurt my hand, lifting weights. Because when it comes, the rule at our house is when it's hugging time. It's hugging time whenever I say it's hugging time. We just announce, time to hug. Everybody runs. The rule at my house is, since I'm the head of the house, I make the rules. The rule at my house is when it's time to hug, we're going to hug, whether you like it or not. If I want to hug, I hug. But that's okay when they're little. You can overpower them, you know. But when they get to be 6'2" and 6'3", sometimes you got to. Well, for a while I could run them down. I've chased a 13-year-old boy, as far as 4 blocks to hug. I mean, principle is principle, right? When it's time to hug, it's time to hug. And now head for the hills, you know. And the neighbors say some strange things about our family. But now my oldest son is now 6'3", and he runs the 880 in under 2 minutes. And so I cannot catch him anymore. I ambushed that sucker. I announce it's hugging time after I've got him, you know. You got to do something, right? I'm not making this up. And but you know, even a 6'3" track star runs the 880 in under 2 minutes. Every once in a while, he forgets that he doesn't want to be hugged. He forgets he's too big for it. And the other night, the track meet, Thursday night, he ran his team qualified for the state finals in the mile medley relay, and he forgot, and he hugged me right in front of everybody. Oh, I loved it. He turned red. About 3 months ago, he got on my lap. I was sitting drinking coffee, and he just forgot. He forgot, and he got on my lap. Have you ever 6'3.5". That was the real trick. You should have seen that. I recommend a lot of head kissing. I tell my sons and daughters that very humbly that I am one of the great head kissers in the history of Western civilization. When I kiss your head, it has been properly kissed, and you may go to school with the full assurance that your head is not unkissed. And now, does that sound silly to you? All this is silly, isn't it? It's not silly. It's life. Let me tell you, I genuinely suffered learning to look my own kids in the eye and say, I love you. And if you were not raised that way, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I have learned 6 languages. I have studied for years. I have done all kinds of hard things, but nothing was ever harder for me than to learn. Aren't you about stammering? To learn those words. I love you, straight on, without blinking, in the eye. Say, son, I love you. Express love. And it's more important from the fathers, because fathers have a harder time with it most of the time. Does that make sense to you? And you see, we need strong discipline and expressed love, the proper balance. And so we spank a lot when it's time to spank, and we kiss a lot when it's time to kiss, and we hug, and we demand much of each other, and we express love. Every day. Understand? Hugging every day. I love you every day. At least once. Straight on. Because our children need this. You see, the time was when society was on the side of the home. That time is past. If you're a grandparent, you need to know that your children, your grandchildren are growing up in a world that is so different from the world you grew up in. It is not as if they had gone to another country. It is as if they had gone to another planet. It is a different world. It's a world that has pressures that we don't know anything about. It's a world that terrifies us, an uncertain world. It's a pessimistic world. It's a world full of hate and betrayal and cheap attractions and cheap affections. And our kids need an anchor for their soul. And that anchor is a 2-pronged anchor. Strong discipline, expressed love. You see, they are not really two opposites. They're the same thing, because many parents do not love their children enough to discipline them. I had a fellow, Daddy, tell me that one time. I just love my kids too much to spank them. And I told him as kindly as I could that if he didn't spank them, the world would. The world would. I love my kids too much to let the world teach them the lessons that I must teach them. You got that? If you don't teach your kids the lessons, the world will teach them. But the world won't love them. The world will be cruel. And they need to learn it from someone who loves them. And that has to be us. Well, that's all I have to say this morning. 2 principles. Prophetic grace, you are special. Express love, I love you. Because I love you, you must obey me. Because I love you, you cannot grow up to be anything but an eagle who flies high. You are special. You are quality. We don't have any throwaways here. We're all keepers. And we act that way. And kids can plant their feet on that, and they can go out to life unafraid. You see, just as I said in the first hour this morning, that children are drawn to people who love them enough to discipline them. Children are drawn to people who require much of them. They want somebody who takes them seriously enough to require much of them. Not perfection, but to require that they raise their eyes and see the heights and be something special. Well, if I haven't made that point, I never will, so I'm going to quit. I learned this from Jesus. The Bible says that God doesn't have any sons. He doesn't discipline. Hebrews chapter 12. The Bible says that God practiced not only grace, but prophetic grace. You see, Jesus died for me in the mind of God before the world was founded. Peter said that in the first gospel sermon. In the predetermined counsel of God, Jesus was crucified for me. You got that? God wanted me before I was ever born. He taught me that. And God taught me that I didn't have to be a jerk. That I didn't have to be cheap. That I wasn't a slave of sin anymore. That I didn't have to be like the world. I didn't have to be stupid. But I could live as one of His children. Circumspectly, not as fools. To live righteously in the world. To have a life, and hear me, a life that means something. Aren't you glad you're a Christian? Amen. Aren't you glad it makes a difference that you're alive? that your life can be significant. God taught me every one of these lessons. You see, all I'm trying to do is treat my kids the way God treats me. And He disciplines me, but He loves me. Express love. When I express love, I have to run a kid down and hug him, or ambush him now, catch him unawares. You see, when God expressed His love for me, it took much more than that. It took a son on a cross. That's express love. The cross says many things to us, but it says in a way that we can never miss. I love you. I love you. If you're not a Christian this morning, you'll have never a greater expression of love than that. God loves you. He gave His Son to die for you. We're going to sing our invitation hymn now. And we invite you to use this opportunity to respond to the gospel and become a child of God. And become a part of the family of God, which will love you and express that love. This has not been an evangelistic message, of course, but perhaps you've got the point. And perhaps there's someone here who has never really taken advantage of the love of God, never really responded. This is your opportunity. We'll help you to confess your faith. We'll help you to obey the gospel if you'll come right now while we stand and while we sing.
330.